All right, we're going to get back into the sketchbook again here, and this time I'm going to look at the figure as a possible idea for a painting. So I'm going to sketch in a little bit different way. I'm going to break it down piece by piece, and let me show you how that works.
I just bought got a book from Bud Plant's fine book outlet, mainly comic book stuff, but it's illustrators and even some fine art work, and it was on Kinsler. Raymond Kinsler, who's kind of the last of the old school from Montgomery Flagg and Dana Gibson, that whole crowd. He was kind of the next generation after that, I believe, but carried on in that style, that illustrative style that started, kind of informed American realist illustration for a long time, for a couple generations really. Came out of the Sargent School. So it was a lovely book. It's on his sketches. It was just a book on his sketchbooks. And so it shows all these great sketches, and he puts little notations in there. And he did a lot of American presidents. And it'll say, well, I did filled up a sketchbook, or I did over several dozen, or I did 30 sketches for this, and here's 4 or 5 of them. And this is what I worked from. I wasn't like the Clinton, he did Clinton portrait work, and he was not allowed to take photographs of Clinton for whatever reason. So he had to work from his sketchbook, and I'm sure he probably looked to a source material of photographs from public events and all that kind of stuff. But that he more or less had to work from his sketches. And so he did a ton of sketches, just followed the man around and sketched for however long he did that, probably a few weeks. And then he worked from that. Those were his references. And he said, I prefer that actually, because I've got the things that are critical, and I left out the things that aren't critical, and a photograph's not going to give me that. So he considered it better reference than the reference of a photo. So I'm not quite with him with that. I like to have the photos too when I'm working. And I don't do portraiture. I did it in when I did movie posters, and no good movie posters, B-movie posters. I would do portraits for that, but I don't really enjoy doing portraiture, but I still want the photograph because it will give me nuances, and not necessarily nuances to copy. It'll give me, it'll let me see what's there, and I can then better see how I'm going to change that. And I like to know, if I just work from my sketch, that I'm just working from the changes, how I stylized. And sometimes I'll not remember if it looked like that and I changed it, or it looked like that and I didn't change it very much, or I changed it radically and it looks nothing like that. I want to know that. And I might change my mind as I'm working. The sketch might be very different than the finish. The sketch I might have done pen and ink and gouache and charcoal. The finish might be in oil, it might be vastly bigger in scale, and all those things will have an effect on the creative solutions and choices I make. So what I'm doing in a little sketchbook, as opposed to a big commission finish, monumental finish, I like to have that reference to work from. And I change reference quite a bit, stylize it quite a bit when I'm working on a finish, but still it's valuable. So anyway, everybody has their little quirks and foibles, and it's wonderful to see a fine artist like Kinsler and listen to and observe the choices that he makes to get what he wants, what he considers a successful completion of a work. And then it's fun to compare and see how you would do it differently. As I've gotten yakking here, this is actually quite a bit tighter than I'd planned, but I got talking. That happens. You guys got me talking. And that, I love the rib cage stretch like that because it's an accordion. The rib cage goes up to the skinnier neck, bulges out to the fullness of that rib cage, the big barrel of the rib cage, and then goes in flat picture plane to us, somewhere in here, and then tucks under the other way. So it's like a slinky, it bulges, goes that way. So I love that reverse stretch. This goes down and in, this goes up and in, and the center area is the closest to us. So that picking that up and seeing how that three-dimensional stretch coming out towards us affects those forms and such is great. So, for example, I'm stylizing this, slapping it in there because I didn't get there and won't. But these marks going this way, those are showing that underneathness, or on top ofness, I should say, the on top ofness of the pelvis. So I'm going to turn those marks this way so they wrap with the curvature of that slinky idea, that cylindrical idea. So very useful and just fun, just a joy to do. Okay, so we'll leave that. Now let's pick out one other little detail just for fun. Let's do the end of this knee here. So I'm going to do it here. And so, by the way, sometimes I'll use, I'm using the white to highlight, literally highlight the forms in light. But I can also use it as a notation to show which way, like this isn't descriptive, it looks flat in the picture plane. I actually want it to go back in. I want the elbow to be farther from me than the shoulder, going back in at least a little bit. So maybe I'll come in and render that subtlety in there, but I could just do a notation with one or both tools, like this is coming towards me this way. So you can just use that for shortcuts. So let's get that knee in here. Okay, so this is going back this way, an egg, bulging egg, or a bulging tube, or whatever. And then when we get to the end here, that knee structure, I most of the time turn it into a boxy structure. So where this goes from top to front, that's going to be a corner. And I really, really, really want the shading or the highlight, in this case will be the shading, to track right at that point or very, very close to it. If it's a rounded corner, as these things all end up being to some extent, then the place of the shadow may vary. But I'm gonna, since it varies, I'm gonna push it right up to where I want. If it happens to be a little lower, I'll sneak it up a little higher to get it right at that corner place. Nobody will know the difference. So that shadow then really helps me understand. So I'm going to conceive of that as a boxy structure for several reasons. One, a box has greater structure to it. Structure is perspective, the position, plus the form, the three-dimensional volume, the mass, the form, but its character, boxy or whatever, but also its position. The boxier it is, the more we understand its position. We know that this is sitting upright and going back in space. We don't know that about this structure. It's just a ball that has plenty of form. We can give it plenty of form, but we can't give it as easily give it the position in space as precisely. So getting a nice boxy end also gives us a little bit of variety. There's an egg in here, let's say. There's a tube in here, let's say, and there's a box right here. And so there's that box here. If we brought it down through the shadow, and continued it, we'd see that it wants to go this way. And we can start, I'll give that a little bit different value. We can start seeing that as a very subtle, sophisticated kind of box, not just a cardboard shipping box. And then it stretches on over to that binding up at the crook of the knee. Notice again, halftone leads us into and out of shadow in a really interesting way. It helps to tie shapes together. And we could hatch that to death or to completion. It doesn't have to be a negative at all. Or we can just leave it as a subtle suggestion or a beginning of the idea. But I was more interested in this. And I will tend to leave things finished, more finished and less finished. Because that's more interesting too. It's not only can we render this all out and make it super realistic, but when we do that, oftentimes it all looks kind of even and it loses a little bit of impact for me. I prefer to leave things unfinished by leaving the shadows vague or making one area, say the eye, really dialed in, the others more indicated, maybe more painterly in brushstroke, maybe less color variation, maybe less realistic value range. And all of that then creates a hierarchy of interest. The areas that we really dial in are going to tend to attract more attention. The areas that are sketchy, loose, abstracted, unfinished, vignetted, faded back, any of that kind of stuff will attract less interest. Notice in the sketching, when I'm not finishing something, I'm just showing the direction that structure would take. I'm not actually showing the structure. I can show the three-dimensional direction too that it would take, or does take. What I'm really interested in is that long axis direction though, because that's going to be that rhythm. That's going to tell us how we get from the knee into the calf, how we get from the calf to the shin and down to the foot and so on. So feeling that long axis carries us along and ties it together. That's kind of the key compositional idea, is that long axis. How do we get from here to there? Okay. Let's,
All right, that was our sketchbook drawing for our full figure, trying to target areas that might be difficult, areas you need to work on, or areas that you may want to target for a finish. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I see you next time.